Welcome to the ACS Technical Advisory Board podcast series, where we talk all things tech including data, cyber, AI, blockchain, and Internet of Things. Meet your host, Dr. David Cook, Vice President of the Australian Computer Society's Technical Boards. David is a technology advocate dedicated to advances and progression of computing and human-computer interaction. In today's episode, David will be talking with ACS Standards Australia representative and project management expert, Neville Turbit. Join us as we discuss why standards and frameworks are important, as well as accessible information technology for everybody.
Today, we're talking with Neville Turbit. Neville is the ACS representative for MB012, which is Project, Program and Portfolio Management. He spent about 20 years in IT in positions ranging from an analyst to a programmer to a CIO to a project manager to consulting. And he's a foundation member of the project management group set up by Standards Australia. And he's represented South Australia on various ISO standards programs. And he's also a past convener of the ACS Project Management SIG. Neville, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
So Neville, tell us, why are international standards important?
There's an answer to this that I usually give, which is to tell people to go into their kitchen, open that drawer where they've got all those plastic containers that don't have lids and lids that don't have plastic containers, and wonder why there isn't an international standard. The international standards cover so many different areas, but when you look around and you find the incompatibility between various countries, between various manufacturers, you start to understand why it's important to have an international standard. We have started developing standards for project management only in the last 10 to 15 years. And project management's been around for centuries. So we've only actually got to that now. So it's important that we do have some standards that work across all countries, and that if you're doing a contract in one country for delivery in another country, you're both talking the same language. That's why international standards are important.
I mean, everyone has their bugbear. Mine, of course, is mobile phone connections. I hate the fact that there's an Apple phone has a Lightning connector and something else has a USB-C and something else has a USB and micro connectors. That they drive me crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of manufacturers don't like working to a standard because it means what they make is interchangeable with what other people make. And Apple making their own connections for phones is a nice little revenue earner for them.
Absolutely, I get that. But I think from a professionalism point of view, and this is what the ACS is about making sure that we want information technology that works for everybody, accessible across the planet. So
absolutely, quite agree. Yeah.
Neville, tell us, what are you working on right now that's important?
I've been on a committee with perhaps if I go back a step, there's been a whole lot of project management standards developed that are guidelines, and they're not things that you can actually measure. They're guidelines for organisations for doing things like risk management, for example. However, we are now working on putting together a proposal that will be considered actually next week by the International Committee, and that's to develop a standard that is a requirement standard, which means it can be measured. Now, most people have come across ISO 9000, ISO 9001 over the years, which is quality management for operational systems. And there was never a quality standard for project management. So coming out of a project I worked on, a standard for project management competencies, ISO has an international in it. And it's not just what works in the first world. We need to be developing things that work in other parts of the continent, in the developing world. And to put it into computer terms, if you're doing some offshore development in another country, how do you know that that organisation you're dealing with are actually capable of doing the project correctly? And so now we're talking about a requirement standard that would be an independent assessment of that organisation to make sure that they're actually capable of doing projects. They have the environment in place, they have the people in place, and you can give some assurance to the person who's purchasing the services that this organisation actually can do the job for you. So that's been put to the ISO committee next week. If that's approved, we'll go ahead and develop a standard.
It sounds to me like you're juggling two key elements here. One is capability and maturity on the one hand, and then interoperability, the ability for anyone at any part of the globe to be able to access and use. So internet access is a no-brainer, obviously,
Yeah.
but that's easier said than done. What I do see is lots of new innovative or perhaps quite flashy-looking things that I can put on my mobile phone, different things that will help me operate a new Gantt chart or a sort of or some kind of Slack forum or social media integration with that. I guess they're all useful tools, but I think you make a great point, which is it doesn't work if the other part of the environment doesn't have access to quality 24/7 internet or doesn't have the necessary tools to be able to do that in a refined manner.
Absolutely. And what we're trying to do here is for the companies in the developing world, this will be a boom for them. In Australia, not necessarily so much. There are plenty of ways and plenty of consultants out there who will tell you whether you've got the capability to undertake projects. But in the third world, it's a lot of people who claim to be able to do projects really have no idea. They can barely spell the word. Whereas now we're putting in a measure where we will have the organisations assessed if this standard goes ahead, and they can then make their you can then make a much more value judgment of whether the company's able to do the work or not.
Tell us a little bit about the process of delivering standards, and how do we get from start to finish where people in industry actually get to use some of these things?
The first step is a country has to put forward a proposal, and it's not just I've got an idea. It has to be fairly well fleshed out, and that country has to provide a convener for the group who will work with the group all the way through, and they also have to provide a secretary for the group to do all the admin work. So it can be one country or a couple of countries can combine, and they put forward a proposal. That goes to the technical committee who approve it. If they approve it, then a committee is formed, and all the members of the ISO are invited to join, either as participating members or as observing members. So in the standard where I've worked on in the past, we might have maybe 20 to 25, 30 participating countries, and you might have another 30 or 40 observing countries. And it's not just the Western world that's doing all this. So the group meet, they draft a standard, and it might take a week for the first draft, and that's distributed to all the people who are participating and observing, and they can make comments, but each comment has to be constructive. You put forward a reason why a particular sentence or word may not fit, and then you give an alternative. And it may be just to delete it, but it may be saying it needs to be reworded in a certain way. All these go back to the secretary of the committee. They then collate all the comments, and another meeting is held, usually 6 to 12 months later, where all of those points are addressed, and they're either accepted or they're rejected, and a reason is given as to why they were rejected, or they may be modified. So you'll go through that cycle a couple of times, and eventually a final standard will be developed. That then goes to ISO, who then go through it, make sure the typos have been eliminated, make sure the language is right, because you're talking with people from multiple languages here. So then it's eventually it's published, and then the next step is for each of the countries to adopt that standard. So eventually, about 3 years down the track, maybe 4 years, the standard goes from an idea in someone's head through to on the shelf at Standards Australia.
Yeah, it's great to know that there's a procedure about this, because it means that when we get a standard, we don't want, as you say, going back to your example, we don't want different lids on different containers, and we need to really dot the I's and cross the T's on this kind of thing. I wonder, just looking into the future, what does project management look like in, say, the year 2030? What are we trying to get towards in terms of the future of project management?
I think more consistency and more professionalism. There is enormous push from all around the world to get projects with a higher success rate. And the way to do that is to try and make things consistent in the way they're done, make them understandable across borders, because more and more we're going across borders with projects. And you only have to look at some of the infrastructure that's happening in Sydney at the moment, with trains being built in Spain and steel coming from all over the world. And then you want to try and make sure that when one country talks to another, they talk in the same language. So I think that is probably it'll be decades before that happens. But I think eventually we'll start to get that consistency, and that will break down some of the issues. From a people point of view, it's also about educating not the project team, but the people who are on the periphery, the people who are providing the funding, the people who are the government minister who's talking about it and thinks that because they made an announcement, it can all start next week. So we need to be able to spread the word to those sort of people about how complex a project is.
Neville Turbit, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
To find out more about how the ACS is powering Australia's technology brilliance, visit us at our website, Facebook or LinkedIn. Want to get involved with the ACS technical boards? Email us at tab@acs.org.au and tell us a bit about yourself. Join us for more thought leadership, ideas, and information through our other podcasts on the ACS YouTube, Facebook, or on LinkedIn.